Under the orange glow of the dying sun, the land stretched wide and wild, scarred by wind and time. Dust swirled over the dry earth, whispering stories of forgotten battles and buried pain. The scent of smoke and sage lingered in the air. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a lonely hawk cried out against the fading light. She stood near the edge of the old trail, her heart pounding harder than the stallion's hooves she'd just escaped on. Her pale hands still trembled as she pressed them against her skirt, trying to calm the rush of fear and confusion that filled her. Behind her, the soft crackle of twigs broke the silence, a sound too heavy. It's too deliberate to belong to the wind. When she turned, he was already there. Broad-shouldered, silent as shadow, the Apache warrior emerged from the trees like the night itself had taken human form. His dark hair, half-tied with leather, fell against his chest, and his bare arms glowed under the evening light, bronzed and dusted with the grit of battle. His eyes, sharp, unreadable, and burning with something she couldn't name, fixed on her. For a long heartbeat, no words passed between them. Only the soft gust of wind carried her hair across her face, and his breath brushed against her skin when he stepped closer. "Don't devour me with that look, you damned Apache," she whispered, her voice trembling between defiance and surrender. But her body betrayed her, rooted to the ground, unable to move. His presence wasn't just near. It was consuming, dangerous, yet it drew her in like fire draws a moth. Every story she had heard about his kind, ruthless warriors, untamed, merciless, collided with the truth standing before her. This was no savage monster. This was a man carved by loss, pride, and hunger for something the world had denied him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His gaze spoke for him, fierce, questioning, wounded. Her heart raced with the clash of two worlds, two hearts that never should have met. She was a woman raised on fear of his people, told that Apaches brought nothing but ruin. Yet now, in the quiet of the wilderness, fear twisted into something else, something dangerous. The land around them seemed to hold its breath. The sun slipped below the hills, painting the world in gold and shadow. She tried to turn away, to remind herself of who she was, of where she belonged, the small white settlement by the river, the chapel bells, the rules of her people. But something in his eyes stripped away every reason she had ever clung to. He stepped closer again, slow, deliberate, until the space between them vanished. Her pulse thundered. She could feel the heat of his skin, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the faint scent of smoke and earth clinging to him. She wanted to run, yet something deeper told her that running would change nothing because something inside her had already crossed a line. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing the strand of hair that had caught on her lips. That simple touch made her breath hitch. She hated how her body responded, how warmth unfurled inside her like wildfire. Consuming her fear, he looked at her not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but as if she were something sacred, something fragile he had no right to touch, yet couldn't help but reach for. The silence between them was a storm waiting to break. The distant call of a coyote echoed through the hills, reminding her how far from safety she was. Still, she didn't move. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. He didn't answer. His eyes flickered, shadowed by memory, as if the question itself carried a wound too deep to speak of. She thought of the stories of soldiers taking Apache children, of raids that ended in blood. Maybe he had lost someone. Maybe they both had. Her horse shifted nervously behind her, tugging at its reins, but she couldn't look away. His gaze was an anchor holding her in place, even as her mind screamed to flee. Somewhere deep down, she knew this meeting wasn't an accident. The frontier had a cruel way of weaving fate through danger. Binding hearts that should have never crossed paths, he finally spoke. His voice low and rough like gravel dragged across stone. "You're on sacred ground," she swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to trespass." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might strike her down. But instead he turned his head slightly, looking toward the west, where smoke rose faintly in the distance. Her camp. "Your people burned our dead," he said. The words were soft but heavy enough to crush the silence between them. Her throat tightened. "I didn't know, but they know now," he replied. his tone sharp, almost a whisper. The wind shifted. Carrying the scent of the campfire from afar, her people, the same ones who would shoot this man on sight, guilt pressed hard against her chest, but she couldn't look away. Something about him, his pain, his strength, his defiance stirred a feeling she didn't understand. He stepped back, as if fighting himself. For a fleeting second, his control cracked, and she saw the turmoil in his eyes, the war between hatred and something that looked like longing. "Go back," he said finally. "Before they find you with me?" She nodded, though her heart screamed against it. The idea of leaving him there, alone among the dead, felt unbearable. "And if I don't?" she asked quietly. His eyes hardened again, but the corner of his mouth twitched, almost like a ghost of a smile. "Then you'll belong to this land," he said, "and it takes everything." She should have turned away right then. She should have mounted her horse and ridden until the night swallowed her. But something, in his words and his gaze, rooted her where she stood. Her fingers brushed against her skirt, her breathing shallow. The air between them felt alive, electric, charged with something both beautiful and terrifying. He took another step back, his figure melting into the growing dusk. "You shouldn't have come here," he murmured. "And yet I did," she whispered to herself. The words lost to the wind, the world around her dimmed. The sun had vanished, leaving only the shimmer of firelight flickering from the distant camp and the faint outline of the warrior disappearing into shadow. She didn't know his name, didn't know what drove him or what he carried inside. But she knew one thing. This meeting had changed everything. She looked toward her horse, then back at the dark tree line. The forest seemed to breathe, alive with unseen eyes. The sound of a single drum echoed faintly from somewhere deep beyond the hills, rhythmic and haunting. A storm was gathering, not of weather, but of fate. And as the first star pierced through the darkening sky, she realized she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't turn away from. Something forbidden. Something that could destroy them both or set them free. The wind rose again, tugging at her hair as her lips parted with a trembling breath. Her heart whispered his presence even after he vanished into the night. Somewhere in that silence, the line between fear and desire began to blur. The prairie stretched before her, endless and unknowable. And she felt it, that pull toward the wild, toward him. She mounted her horse slowly, torn between two worlds, unaware that the next dawn would bring more than she could imagine. Because fate had already chosen its path, and it began the moment she met his eyes. The night that followed was restless. She lay in her tent listening to the wind slide over the prairie, carrying faint sounds that seemed to come from the other world, the cry of a coyote, the rustle of grass, and sometimes the echo of a drum beat that might have been her imagination. Sleep would not come. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw those dark eyes again, calm, fierce, and unreadable. They had pierced straight through her fear and settled somewhere deep inside her. The image of the Apache standing against the dying sun refused to fade. He had spoken few words, but each one had felt like it carried the weight of something much larger than himself. By morning, she felt the same pull she had the night before, the same invisible force urging her to return to that forbidden land. But duty and fear held her back. In the camp, the others moved about their chores, unaware of the turmoil inside her. The men were busy mending wagons and sharpening tools, while women gathered near the fires to wash clothes and bake bread. Children ran barefoot through the dust, laughing as if the frontier had no ghosts. But she knew better. This land was alive with memories, both beautiful and cruel. She tried to lose herself in the rhythm of the camp, helping with the morning tasks. But every whisper of wind and every shadow beyond the ridge reminded her of him. The elder woman who led the settlers, stern, gray-haired, and steady, warned her once more never to wander beyond the marked boundaries. "Those hills belong to the Apache," she said. "Their ghosts still walk there." The warning was meant to frighten her, yet it only stirred more curiosity. What kind of man guarded those spirits? What pain lived behind his silence? By noon, she wandered toward the edge of the settlement, telling herself she only wanted to gather firewood. But her steps led her closer to the river, the border between their world and his. The water shimmered under the sun, cool and clear, winding through the valley like a silver thread. On the far side, the land rose into dense pines and hidden paths. She could almost imagine him there, moving through the trees, watching her with those steady eyes. The thought both frightened and comforted her. She crouched by the riverbank, dipping her hands into the cold water. For a moment, everything felt still. Then she noticed something half buried in the mud, a piece of leather, worn and carved with strange patterns. She lifted it carefully. It was an armband decorated with small beads and faint markings. It looked like something that might have belonged to him. Her heart thudded hard as she turned it in her hands, before she could decide what to do with it. She heard a faint sound behind her, the snap of a twig. She turned sharply, but there was no one there. Only the trees swaying and the soft ripple of water. Still, she felt it, that same presence, that same energy that filled the air when he was near. Her breath quickened. She waited, scanning the shadows, but nothing moved. Finally, she tucked the armband into her dress and turned back toward camp. That night, strange dreams came to her. She saw fire in the distance, smoke curling toward the stars. She saw a small child crying beside a broken cradle. She saw a warrior standing alone, surrounded by the dead. And then she saw herself reaching out to him, though the space between them was filled with flames. She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if she had lived it all. Over the next few days, the camp grew tense. Rumors spread that Apache riders had been seen near the northern ridge. The men started keeping their rifles closer, and the women whispered prayers before sleep. Some said a war band was gathering again, angry over a raid that had destroyed one of their burial sites. She knew then what he meant when he said, "Your people burned our dead." It was true. A week before she arrived, the settlers had cleared an area for their livestock, burning what they thought were old remains of a native camp. No one had told her. But now the truth hung heavy over everyone. She couldn't stop thinking about what that meant. Her people's ignorance might have awakened something vengeful. And worse, how she was now tied to it by fate. The armband she found seemed to hum with unseen meaning. She kept it hidden beneath her pillow, touching it when the nights grew too quiet. Each time her fingers brushed over it, she felt the same mixture of guilt and yearning. One evening, as the sun dipped low again, she found herself walking alone near the edge of camp. The prairie glowed in soft gold and amber, the air cool and still. In the distance, smoke rose faintly from somewhere far beyond the hills. The sight made her chest tighten. She knew it was his people's fire. For reasons she could not explain, she started walking toward it. The path grew narrow and wild. The ground was uneven, littered with stones and bones bleached white by the sun. She moved carefully, each step echoing in her mind like a heartbeat. When she reached the old oak near the ridge, she stopped because he was there. He stood by his horse, tightening the strap of his bow, his back turned to her. He looked the same as before, strong, still carved from the earth itself. The moment he turned, her breath caught. He had seen her before she even spoke. For a long time, neither moved. The air between them felt thick with things neither knew how to say. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice low like thunder rolling in the distance. "I know," she answered softly, "but I had to come." His eyes searched hers, suspicious, but not cruel. "Your people prepare for war," he said. "They sharpen blades while we bury our dead." She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "They don't understand what they've done. They never do," he said bitterly. Something inside her ached at the sound of that pain. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know until it was too late." Stared at her for a long moment, then turned away as if fighting a battle within himself. "Sorry doesn't bring back what was taken." "I know," she said again. Her voice cracked with something she didn't expect, not fear, but sorrow. He looked back at her then, his expression softening just slightly. "Why did you come?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because I can't stop thinking about you." The words slipped out before she could stop them. A flush rose to her cheeks. For a moment, he said nothing, only studied her face as though trying to decide whether she spoke truth or madness. He stepped closer. "Your heart speaks like the wind, soft, but it cuts deep." "I don't want it to," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to understand." "Then listen," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "This land remembers everything. Every cry, every wound, every fire. The earth holds it. So do we. And now, so do you." She felt the weight of his words settle inside her. Something about them felt like a warning, yet also a bond. It was as if the land itself had drawn them together, weaving their lives into one thread, whether they wanted it or not. The sound of a distant gunshot cracked through the air, startling them both. He spun toward the direction of the sound, his hand gripping the knife at his belt. "They're hunting," he said sharply. "My people?" she asked, fear rising. "They don't know how close they are," he muttered. Then his gaze met hers again, urgent. "You must go. If they see you here, they'll think you're one of us." "I don't care what they think," she said, stepping forward. But he caught her wrist, not rough, but firm. "You should," he said, "because once they do, there's no going back." The touch of his hand sent a shiver through her. The closeness, the scent of leather and smoke, the fierce light in his eyes, all of it tangled her thoughts. She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't afraid. But before she could speak, voices echoed faintly from the valley below. He turned toward the trees. "Go back," he ordered. "Now?" she hesitated. "Will I see you again?" His expression changed, shadowed by something unreadable. "That depends on whether you listen tonight." She wanted to ask what he meant, but he was already gone. Swallowed by the forest before her next breath, as she hurried back toward camp, the air felt heavier. The voices grew louder, her people searching, calling for her. Unaware of how close they'd come to crossing the same line she had, when she finally reached her tent, her pulse was wild. Her thoughts tangled between fear and something she could no longer deny. The wind picked up outside, carrying the faint beat of drums again, steady, distant, haunting. She pressed her hand over the hidden armband beneath her pillow and whispered a prayer. She didn't fully understand, in her heart. She knew that the world she belonged to was changing, and that somewhere in the shadows, the Apache warrior she couldn't forget was waiting for the storm to break. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. The settlers moved about their work, pretending everything was normal. But fear hung over the camp like smoke that wouldn't clear. The gunshot that had echoed through the valley still haunted her ears. No one had said where it came from or who fired it, but she could feel something had shifted. The men kept watch at night now, rifles leaning against wagons, eyes restless under the stars. The women whispered about Apache scouts seen in the hills. And the air carried the tension of two worlds bracing for a storm neither wanted, but both expected. She tried to keep her head down, to blend into the ordinary rhythm of life, hauling water, cooking, tending the small garden patch, but inside her thoughts were miles away. She couldn't stop thinking about him, the way his voice had cut through the stillness. The warning in his words, the look in his eyes that seemed to hold a story older than the land itself. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that look again, the quiet sorrow buried under his strength. And she couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting had bound her to something much larger than herself. Late one evening, a group of men returned from scouting the northern ridge. Their leader, a hard-faced man with a scar across his cheek, announced that Apache riders had been spotted again, moving in small groups, watching from a distance. The settlers grew restless. Some demanded action, others spoke of abandoning the land altogether. But the elder woman, who had always been the voice of reason, insisted they stay. "This is our home now," she said firmly. "Fear will not drive us out." Her words steadied the group for the moment, but she could see the unease behind their eyes. That night, when the fires burned low, she overheard the men whispering about striking first, about riding out to teach them a lesson. The idea made her stomach twist. She knew what that meant. Blood would spill again, and there would be no turning back. Sleep wouldn't come. She slipped from her tent and walked toward the river, drawn by the same pole that had led her there before. The moon hung low, lighting the water in pale silver, The forest beyond looked alive, breathing softly in the wind. She waited there for a long time, half hoping, half fearing he might appear, and he did. He emerged from the shadows like he belonged to them, quiet, controlled, his gaze fixed on her. For a long moment, they said nothing. The only sound was the river between them. Then he stepped forward, his voice calm but heavy. "They are preparing for war." She nodded slowly. "So are your people, aren't they?" He didn't deny it. When the earth is wounded, it cries out. Both sides hear, but neither listens. She wanted to argue, to tell him not everyone in her camp wanted war. But deep down, she knew words wouldn't change what was coming. Still, she couldn't stop herself from asking, "Can it be stopped?" His eyes held hers. "It could have been before the fire. Before your people burned our ancestors." "I wasn't part of that," she said quietly. "No," he replied, "but now you carry its weight." His tone wasn't accusing. It was resigned, almost sorrowful. She looked away, guilt rising in her throat. "I found something near the river," she said. "An armband. It must be yours." He looked surprised, then wary. "You kept it." "I didn't mean to," she said quickly. "I just couldn't throw it away. It felt important." He studied her face for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "It belonged to my brother," her breath caught. "Your brother?" "He was among those buried in the ground your people burned," he said softly. "He was young, a hunter, not a fighter. He went back to protect our dead. He never returned." She felt the air leave her chest. The weight of what she held, what her people had done, pressed hard against her heart. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but the words felt too small. It's too weak to carry the truth. He looked past her, toward the camp lights flickering in the distance. "Sorry does not feed the hungry or calm the angry," he said. "But maybe there is still a way to keep the fire from spreading. How?" She asked. His eyes returned to hers. "You could help us." The words froze her in place. "Help you?" "There's a man in your camp," he said. "The one with the scar." He led the burning. "He plans to strike again. If he does, more will die. My people and yours. You can stop him." She felt her pulse race. "I can't. They'd never listen to me." "You don't need to speak," he said. "Just watch. Warn me when they move. One word could save lives." She hesitated, torn between fear and something deeper, something that told her he was right. "If I do this," she said softly, "they'll call me a traitor." He stepped closer, his voice low. "And if you don't, you'll be a witness to slaughter." His words hit her like a knife. She looked at him, seeing not just a warrior, but a man carrying the grief of his people. And something inside her shifted, a mix of pity, anger, and a strange, undeniable pull. "I'll try," she said at last. He nodded once, then turned toward the trees. "Be careful," he said. "When men fear what they don't understand, they destroy it." She watched him disappear into the darkness, her heart pounding. When she returned to camp, the fires were low, and the men were still awake, whispering around the flames. She caught pieces of their talk, plans for a raid, talk of revenge, the name of the ridge where they'd seen smoke. Everything he said was true. For the next 2 days, she lived in quiet torment. She pretended to work, to listen, to pray with the others, but every word of the men's planning burned in her mind. She knew she should tell him, but how? If anyone saw her leave again, suspicion would fall fast. The elder woman noticed her restlessness and asked what troubled her, but she could only shake her head. "It's just the waiting," she said. That night, she couldn't stand it anymore. When the camp grew quiet, she slipped away again, moving through the dark as silently as she could. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the path was barely visible. She followed the river until she reached the old oak where they had met before. She waited, heart hammering, afraid he might not come this time. But he did. "You came," he said softly. "They're leaving at dawn," she whispered. 5 men, led by the one with the scar. They planned to attack the village in the valley. He nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready." "Please," she said, stepping closer. "Don't fight them. Don't let this turn into more killing." He looked at her with that same quiet sorrow. Sometimes the earth demands blood to be quiet. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his arm. Then let it be mine before it's theirs. He stared at her for a moment, stunned. You speak like one of us, he said. Maybe I've just seen too much. She whispered. A faint noise broke the stillness, the snap of a branch, the murmur of distant voices. He turned sharply, pulling her close to the shadows. They followed you, he hissed, her breath caught. From the direction of the camp, she saw flickers of light, torches moving through the trees. She recognized the scarred man's voice barking orders. Spread out. She came this way. Panic surged through her. What do we do? She whispered. He tightened his grip on her wrist. We run. They slipped into the forest, moving fast and silent. The undergrowth scratched her arms, branches tore at her skirt, but she didn't dare stop. Behind them, shouts echoed, and the glow of torches cut through the darkness. Her heart pounded so loud, she thought it might give them away. He led her through a narrow ravine, across shallow streams, over fallen logs. When they finally stopped, the night was still again, save for her ragged breathing. You shouldn't have come, he said, his voice sharp now, full of frustration. I had to, she gasped. I couldn't let them start this. Shh. And now you're marked, he said bitterly. They will think you're with me. She stared at him, realizing he was right. If they caught her now, there would be no explaining, no forgiveness. Then I can't go back, she said softly. He looked at her, the anger in his face slowly fading into something else. No, he said. You can't. The weight of those words sank deep. Somewhere behind them, the shouts grew fainter, swallowed by the night. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. The forest loomed endless, the wind cold and sharp. He turned away, scanning the shadows as if expecting more danger. When he finally looked back, his expression had changed. You'll come with me, he said. You'll be safe in our camp until we decide what to do. She hesitated, torn between fear and a strange calm. And if your people don't want me there? He met her eyes. Then I'll stand between you and them. The night wind carried the sound of drums again, faint but steady, calling from somewhere deep in the mountains. The beat felt like a heartbeat, pulling her forward into the unknown. And as she followed him into the darkness, she knew there was no turning back now. The line between fear and fate had vanished, and whatever lay ahead, test both their worlds before the dawn came. The forest seemed endless as they moved deeper into the mountains. The air grew colder, the ground steeper, and the sound of the torches and shouts behind them faded into nothing but memory. She followed close behind him, her heart still racing, her breath coming in short bursts. Every crack of a branch or cry of a night bird made her jump. The Apache warrior moved silently ahead of her, his movements swift and sure, as if the darkness itself bent around him. The path twisted through thick pines until at last, the trees opened to reveal a narrow valley below. Faint lights flickered there, like stars trapped between the rocks. He turned to her and whispered, That's my village. Her eyes widened. Will they accept me? He didn't answer right away. They will see what I see, he said finally. A heart that does not belong to war. They descended carefully, and as they reached the valley floor, the smell of wood smoke and herbs filled the air. The camp was quiet, but alive. Small fires burned between tents made of hide, and people moved in the shadows, their faces drawn with worry and exhaustion. When they saw him, some nodded in respect, others stared at her with suspicion. She felt their eyes following her, reading the pale of her skin and the cut of her dress as signs of the enemy. An older man approached, his hair streaked with gray, his chest marked with the paint of a warrior. He looked at her, then at the man beside her. You bring trouble, he said sharply in their language. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. The warrior spoke back quietly but firmly. The older man's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. Instead, he turned away, motioning for them to follow. They entered a small lodge where the fire burned low in the center. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sage and smoke. A woman sat by the flames, her eyes tired yet kind. She looked at the stranger in her home, and then at the man who brought her. "This is my mother," he said softly. "She knows loss." The woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "You are safe here," she said in broken English. "But mourning will bring questions." Gratitude filled her chest, but so did fear. She sat near the fire, clutching her knees as the warrior spoke in his language with his mother. She caught bits of emotion in his voice, urgency, warning, and something gentler. His mother listened, then glanced at her with a look that was neither distrustful nor kind, but something in between. A look that asked if this woman from another world could truly understand what her presence meant. When the night deepened and the camp grew quiet, she lay on a blanket near the fire. The warrior sat across from her, sharpening his knife, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "They think I've brought danger," he said quietly. "Did you?" she asked. He paused, the blade still in his hand. Maybe, but it was already coming. Outside, the faint sound of drums echoed again, steady and haunting. "They'll come at dawn," he said after a moment. "Your people. They'll follow the trail." Her throat tightened. "Then we should go warn them, tell them to stop." He looked up at her, his eyes full of something deeper than fear. "If we go back, they'll kill me. If we stay, they'll come here. Either way, blood will spill." She shook her head. "There has to be another way." He stared into the fire, silent. Then, finally, he spoke. "There is one, but it will cost much." "What do you mean?" she asked, heart pounding. He didn't answer right away. "There is an old path, one that leads through the canyon to your settlement. If we reach it before sunrise, we can stop them before they reach the valley. But it's dangerous." "Then we'll go," she said firmly. He looked at her, almost in disbelief. "You would risk your life for people who will never thank you." "I'd risk it to stop the killing," she said. Something in his expression softened. He nodded once, then stood. "Then we moved before the first light." The journey through the canyon was like walking through the ribs of the earth. The walls rose high on either side, cutting off the stars. Water dripped from the rocks, echoing like whispers in the dark. The ground was slick, and once she nearly slipped, but his hand caught her before she fell. Their eyes met in the dim light for a moment. The fear around them faded, replaced by a quiet understanding that went beyond words as they pressed on. Distant thunder rolled through the mountains, though no storm could be seen. It wasn't thunder, she realized. It was hooves, riders. He turned sharply, listening. "They're close." "How many?" she whispered. "Too many." They hurried forward, following the narrow path that twisted up the canyon's side. The moon broke through the clouds, lighting the rocks in pale silver. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked the silence. The bullet struck the stone near his shoulder, sending shards flying. He pulled her behind a boulder, shielding her with his body. More shots rang out from the ridge above. Her people had found them. "Stay here," he said, drawing his knife. "No." She grabbed his arm. "You'll be killed." He looked at her with a steady calm. "If I don't stop them, they'll kill everyone I love." Before she could protest, he slipped into the shadows. Her heart pounded as she crouched behind the rock, praying to every name she knew. The gunfire echoed through the canyon, mixed with shouts and the clatter of hooves. She could see flashes of movement. Men on horseback, their torches glowing like burning eyes. She recognized the voice of the scarred man shouting orders. She tried to stay hidden. But when she saw one of the riders taking aim toward where the warrior had disappeared, instinct took over. She picked up a fallen rifle lying near one of the dead horses and fired. The shot went wide, but it startled the men enough to draw their attention. "There's someone else," one of them yelled. The warrior appeared from behind the rocks, moving like shadow and flame. He struck down one of the riders with a swift blow, then another. But there were too many. They circled him, shouting, readying their guns. She ran forward without thinking, shouting his name. The sound stopped everyone for a second. The scarred man turned, his face twisting in fury when he saw her. "You," he spat. "You've brought this on us." He raised his gun toward her, but before he could fire, the warrior lunged. The two men collided, tumbling down the slope in a blur of motion. She screamed, running after them. The ground was steep, covered in dust and loose stones. When she reached them, the warrior was bleeding, his knife knocked from his hand. The scarred man raised a rock over his head, ready to strike. Without thinking, she grabbed the rifle again and hit him across the back with all her strength. He fell, the rock slipping from his grasp. The warrior pushed him away and rolled to his knees, gasping for breath. They both looked at each other, the moment suspended between terror and relief. But the sound of more riders filled the canyon. They were surrounded. The warrior stood, pulling her behind him as the men approached, their rifles raised. The scarred man groaned on the ground but managed to shout, "She's one of them. She betrayed us." The soldiers hesitated, their eyes darting between the wounded man, the woman, and the Apache warrior. "Lower your weapons," she cried. "He's not your enemy." But her voice was drowned by another, the old woman from the settlement riding forward on a white horse. Her gray hair whipped in the wind, her face hard and lined. "Enough," she shouted. The men froze. "What are you doing?" "She's with him," the scarred man wheezed. "They killed Silence," the woman snapped. Her eyes moved from the wounded man to the pair standing together. "You've done enough killing." The soldiers lowered their guns slowly, uncertainty flickering in their faces. The warrior said nothing, his hand still gripping her arm, ready to protect her. The elder woman looked at him, then at her. "You bring strange storms into this valley," she said softly. The air was thick with silence, every man waiting for someone to make a move. In the distance, the first light of dawn began to touch the edge of the canyon. The moment felt fragile, like one wrong breath could shatter it into chaos. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Please, this doesn't have to end in blood. He's trying to protect his people, just as we are." The old woman studied her for a long time. "And who protects you, child?" The answer came quietly. "He does." The warrior's hand tightened around hers, his eyes never leaving the soldiers. The rising sun painted the canyon walls in gold, the light cutting through the smoke and fear. No one spoke. But something was changing in the air, something that felt like the turning of the earth itself. The scarred man, still bleeding, reached for his gun again. The sound of the click echoed sharply. Everyone froze. The old woman raised her hand. "No more," she said firmly. But his eyes were wild, consumed by rage. "You don't understand," he growled. "They'll come for us again. They always do." Before he could pull the trigger, the warrior stepped forward. His voice was calm but full of power. "Then let them come for me." "Not her," the scarred man hesitated. And in that pause, the wind swept through the canyon like a sigh. The old woman turned to the others and said quietly, "Put down your weapons." The moment teetered between peace and chaos. The sun rose higher, the light blinding. The next breath could decide everything: love, war, and the fragile line between them. And as the dust settled around them, the world waited for the choice that would change all their lives forever. The wind carried the dust away, and with it the sound of battle faded into silence. The scarred man's hand shook, the gun still trembling in his grasp. The rising sun burned through the morning haze, painting everything in gold: the rocks, the smoke, the faces of men who had seen too much death. For a moment, no one moved. The Apache warrior stood tall in front of her, ready to take the bullet if it came. She could see the faint shimmer of blood on his shoulder, the mark of his courage, and the steady calm in his eyes. Then the gun lowered. The scarred man's strength gave out, his voice breaking as he dropped to his knees. The sound of the weapon hitting the ground echoed like a release, and every heart there seemed to let out the breath it had been holding. The old woman dismounted her horse slowly, her gray hair catching the sunlight. She looked at both sides, her people with rifles half raised, and the Apache standing proud but tired. "This land has seen enough," she said. "It's time we listen to the earth instead of fighting over it." The men said nothing. The warrior's people appeared at the far edge of the canyon, bows in hand, ready for war. They stopped when they saw him alive, standing with her by his side. The air felt different now, softer somehow, like the valley itself had exhaled. Slowly, one by one, the rifles lowered and the bows relaxed. The tension that had gripped the land began to ease. The warrior turned to her, his voice low. "You changed this," he said. She shook her head. "No, you did. You showed them who you really are." He gave a faint smile, weary but sincere. The old woman approached them and studied the warrior closely. "Your people and mine will never forget what happened here," she said. "But maybe we can begin again." She glanced toward the scarred man who sat slumped on the ground, staring at the dust. "The past cannot be undone, but the future can be written differently." The warrior nodded. "Then let it be written in peace." That was how it began, not with a treaty or a handshake, but with silence and understanding. Both sides turned back toward their homes that morning, not as friends yet, but no longer as enemies. The valley that had been marked by fire and blood now stood quiet under the rising sun. In the days that followed, she stayed in the Apache village, helping care for the wounded. At first, the people kept their distance, unsure of her place among them. But time has a way of softening even the hardest hearts. The children were the first to smile at her, curious and unafraid. Then the women began to trust her, especially when she helped tend to the sick and brought herbs from the nearby river. The warrior's mother watched her closely, saying little, but her eyes no longer carried suspicion. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with fire, the warrior joined her by the river. The air was calm and the scent of rain hung in the breeze. "They talk of moving north," he said, "away from the settlements." She looked at him, her heart heavy. "And you?" He was quiet for a long time. "I have walked too long with hate in my heart," he said softly. "But you showed me another path. Maybe I should follow it." She smiled faintly. "Then follow it wherever it leads." He stepped closer, his gaze deep and steady. "Would you follow it with me?" Her breath caught. "If it leads to peace, yes." He reached into his pouch and pulled out something small, the armband she had found near the river. The beads glimmered faintly in the light. "My brother's spirit has rested," he said. "This no longer belongs to the dead." She took it in her hands, feeling its weight. "Then who does it belong to now?" He smiled, the first true smile she had seen from him. "To those who still have hearts brave enough to hope." That night, a soft rain fell, washing the dust from the earth. The campfires burned low, and the land seemed cleaner, freer. In the morning, she woke to the sound of laughter, real laughter, light and unguarded. The warrior's people were preparing to leave, packing what they could carry, heading north to the higher plains, where the land was still wild and untouched. She helped them gather supplies, and when she looked back at the mountains, she saw the settlement in the distance. Small, quiet, no longer burning. Before he left, the old woman came to her. "The land remembers kindness as much as cruelty," she said. "You've given both sides something to remember." She placed a hand on her shoulder, her eyes softening. "Go where your heart finds peace, child. You've earned it." As the Apache prepared to depart, the warrior rode toward her. He reached out a hand, and she took it. Together they looked toward the rising sun, a new beginning for both worlds. The mountains glowed gold and red, and the river sang softly between them. Carrying away the last remnants of the old pain, they traveled north together. The journey was long, but the air grew fresher, the sky wider, and the silence between them more comfortable. Sometimes they spoke of the past, of fire, loss, and misunderstanding, but more often they spoke of what could come next. She learned his language bit by bit, and he learned hers. In every word shared between them, the walls that divided their worlds began to crumble. When they reached the high plains, the world opened wide before them, endless fields of grass swaying under the wind, eagles circling high above, and the promise of peace stretching as far as the horizon. They built a small shelter by the river, nothing more than wood and hide at first, but it was theirs. The villagers nearby welcomed them, curious but not unkind. The warrior helped them hunt and mend their tools, and she taught the children to read and write the few words she knew. Together, they built something fragile but beautiful, a place where two worlds met without fear. As the seasons passed, the land began to heal. The grass grew green again where fire once burned. The river ran clear, washing away the ashes of the old wars. Traders from the south began to visit, bringing news of peace talks and new agreements between settlers and tribes. Sometimes, when the wind was quiet, she thought she could still hear the faint beat of drums from the valley far behind them. Not as a warning now, but as a song, the warrior stood beside her often at sunset, watching the light fade over the plains. His scars remained, reminders of what he had endured, but his eyes were calm. "Do you ever think of them?" he asked one evening. "Every day," she said, "but not with fear anymore. They will learn what we learned, that peace isn't weakness. It's strength." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And love?" He looked out at the horizon, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Love is the courage to keep trying when the world tells you to give up." The sky turned red and gold, and for the first time, she felt no pull between two worlds. She was part of both, the woman who once belonged to fear and the man who had once lived for vengeance. Now bound by something greater than either had known, years later, when travelers passed through their land, they told stories of the valley where two enemies ended a war without raising their weapons. They spoke of a woman who stood between two worlds and a warrior who chose love over revenge. Some said the earth there still glowed golden at sunrise, and the wind carried whispers of their promise that no land is ever truly lost as long as someone remembers how to heal it. And so their story lived on, carried by the wind, told beside campfires and across rivers, a tale of courage, forgiveness, and hope. The Apache warrior and the woman from the frontier had found what neither of them had dared to dream of: peace in a world that had once been full of hate. As the sun dipped below the hills one evening, she turned to him with a quiet smile. "We made it," she whispered. He looked at her, the fading light in his eyes. "Yes," he said softly, "we made it home." And the land at last rested in peace.